Welcome back, everyone. We are back with our next presentation, and it's my pleasure to present Rickard Hansson. Rickard Hansson he's the founder of WeWe, the world's first framework with the building blocks to add team communication and collaboration to your apps. He's a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years experience building successful companies, and he develops video games in his limited spare time. Hi, Rickard. Can you hear me?
Hi there. I can hear you. That Great. Was a really nice intro. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm just giving the floor is yours. Rickard will be following the chat. So everyone who are in the chat who are watching this live, you can ask the questions during his presentation. He might just answer it straight away. So Rickard and his presentation, the key ingredient retaining users in your app and reducing churn. So Rickard, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. So hi guys, as Lucas said, right, I'm totally open for you guys to answer or ask questions during the slides. I will try to answer them in real time. I also have a tendency to speak very fast, so I would say keep that in mind, or you can actually say something in the chat to slow me down. But anyways, as Lucas said in his very flattering introduction, I'm Rickard Hansson, working as a CEO and founder of WeWe. And fancy titles aside, being CEO or not, by the end of the day, in my heart, I'm a geek. Tinkering away with my Commodore 64 when I was 11 years old, and so on and so forth, creating demos and whatnot. I don't know if you guys know about that scene. Given build stuff is kind of a geeky kind of a conference, I want to just say I'm one of you. I'm not the suits. And I'm insanely passionate about software and app development and just that in general. It's like I've been building products since, for 25 years ago, something like that, from the scratch, from the bottom up. Even when I was like 13 years old or whatnot, I built like customer databases for my dad. But anyhow, so that's just setting the stage about me. Let's, get into the topic. So the topic, as mentioned, right, is the retain users in your app and reduce churn. Will be to be even more exact and be true to what I said in my introduction, is the key ingredient to retaining users in your app and reducing churn. And focusing here, right, if you're going to using presentation techniques, we're going to focus on two or three things we have to take takeaways from this presentation. That would be the ingredient, obviously. We want to know what that is. And also the churn, which is like, the key metric as a successful app developer anyhow. So that's what we're going to dive into. And hopefully I'm going to answer those questions for you and give you some inspiration to move forward. And with that, I'm going to start with something I call disruptive innovation model. So I promise you, this is not boring. It's quite fun, actually. So I'm not going to lecture you. It's not back in the school bench. But this is something I use all the time. It's been, guiding me for the last 25 years in terms of creating products. And this disruptive innovation model, as a phrase, as a term, was coined back in 1995 by a guy called Clayton Christensen, who was trying to figure out how you can get into a new market space or an old market space and be disruptive. So bear with me. This is actually really, really fun, at least. And take this to heart, in terms of how you plan your product, your roadmap, and how you align to your customers and so on and so forth. And Google it later on and read up on it. There's good videos about it from Harvard University and so on and so forth. But putting into some kind of context is that we have these kind of blocks where we have the impact to the market and the newness, the technology newness, so to speak. And you have these quadrants, and obviously you want to always be up in the top right? But looking at the most interesting, I think, is sustaining is like the incumbents, right? The old companies in the industry that has like a huge market space or market share already. And then we have the disruptives who wants to disrupt an existing market. Usually don't create it like in a new market space or a new market, but they do disrupt something that exists. Incremental is kind of boring, very small incremental changes. I would blame or, put a spotlight on SAP, for example, even if they're, somewhat innovative, but I will put them in that bucket. Radical is something when you create something totally super new and you create a new market, which is really, really hard and super expensive. So for this session and focusing on the disruptive innovation model, right? Let's focus on that particular piece, that block, that quadrant, disruptive, and help you hopefully be disruptive within your market space, whether that be CRM, ERP, BI, or LMS, or medical, or whatever that might be. Put this into a fancy schmancy axis diagram. We have on the left, or whatever, right, or on your screen, bells and whistles, and then we have time in the bottom. So bells and whistles are obviously features, and this is true. Like obviously, we're all in the software and IT industry, but this is true for if you're creating tables or chairs or lamps or houses. This is always true, but we have the features there, right? The customer need is always in that space in some capacity, and it starts somewhere and then it increases. The customer need and also how much it actually can consume, so to speak, how much it can consume over, like in terms of features on the market. And that is growing quite slowly over time, a customer need. If we then take a vendor into this particular chart, and let's just take an incumbent, you will enter the market trying to catch up with the customer need. And then over time, you will obviously cross that line. And then you will continue to sustain your position, and you will incrementally, massive increments actually, like you will do a lot of updates over time to your product. And you will cross that line, and we will continue to cross. This is true for, I would say, 9 out of 10 companies, that you just continue to add and add and add features to your product, despite the customer need being way below, actually. So that gap you see there is actually, what I would call the money pit. So the money pit is basically whatever you have there in between is something people won't pay for. So even if you invest more, you spend more dollars on that, and no one will pay for it because there's no need for it. They don't even have the bandwidth to consume those features. So that's what's creating an opportunity for a disruptor to enter the industry. So a disruptor enters the industry usually faster. So you can see it's a little bit steeper curve. And a good disruptor, a smart disruptor, can also bend the curve. So as you can see in the end, like it's actually aligning to the customer need, but slightly above, because you still want to be innovative, right? You still want to, move the market forward, but your money pit, so to speak, is way, way less. You're not spending dollars where you're not supposed to spend them. And if you do this correctly as a disruptor, whatever that might be, or any, like if you're not a disruptor, if you're just aligning yourself to the customer need as closely as possible, you will have more time and bandwidth to actually create more features in your product and be more competitive and all that stuff. So I've been using this, for the last 20 years as a kind of a guidance on how we do product development and how we prioritize and making sure that we're not, shooting way too over, like, do moonshot when we just have to be like realistic. And to put some samples in place for this, we can talk about Excel, for example. So to the left here, we have Microsoft Excel 95, and up to the far right, we have the latest, fanciest Excel version. And I can guarantee you that everyone in this room can probably fire up Excel 95 right now and use it and be fine with it. The features you see there is going to work for you. You're going to be able to do your, tables, your charts and whatnot, all those stuff. So what has happened between 95 and right now is not that much, to be honest. But as a sustaining or as an incumbent like Microsoft, they still need to be innovative, they think, and push forward and invest heavily in all those new features. But at the same time, they are creating the money pit. Talking about then a disruptor in this case, I would say is Google Sheets. So I was like looking it up the other day, but Google Sheets is actually launched in 2006. That's a long time ago, 14 years ago. But it's lately, I will say, the last 5-6 years, it's actually been really taking up and become like a real player. I would call them a disruptor. But the interesting thing is a disruptor how? It's not like Google Sheets is delivering any more features, right? It's literally a copy. Like the UI interface, the functions, the menus are all the same. If I know Excel, I know Google Sheets. So how can they be a disruptor if you're just doing the same thing? What we found out there is like the disruptive thing they did was the delivery, how they deliver the application. And that was through the web browser, right? Not, old app that needs to be installed. it was the delivery model that was the disruptive thing, and that made it more accessible. And the reason they were able to do that was because Google has cloud in their DNA, while Microsoft back in 2006, when they started creating the Google Sheets, was far off from that. Nowadays, obviously, they have, right? They're more with Azure, they're taking up the fight and so on and so forth. But that gave Google back then an opportunity to be disruptive, but not from a feature perspective at all. It was just how they deliver it and the experience, how to access it and share it and collaborate and whatnot. So I think that's really interesting. And looking into like, how can we make you guys then disruptive in your industry? And it's not about like, inventing something completely new, something completely that doesn't exist. It's just about how can I be more disruptive towards my competitors and be like a leader in my industry in terms of this should be a standard within all the apps within CRM, ERP, or LMS. The most well-known disruptive innovative example is obviously Netflix and Blockbuster. Netflix is thriving, as we all know, specifically now, and Blockbuster went bankruptcy. And back in 2007, Netflix started, they were doing the exact same thing before, right? DVDs. But in 2007, Netflix started streaming. And then it's been going in that direction since, right? So if we want to be successful in our disruptive, venture, Netflix should be you guys, and everything else, Blockbuster, whatnot, should be the old farts in your industry, right? We want to compete with them, be smarter, faster, more agile, and so on and so forth. And usually that is true for a disruptor, right? They're using the resources way more efficiently. While the incumbents have like basically really good mechanisms in place to shoot IDs down, because that's not how they work. So disruptive right now then, because disruption sometimes comes from the outside. So right now we're obviously seeing a lot of disruption going on. The reason I'm standing here in my house with the green screen behind me, talking to you guys sitting at home, is because everyone is working from home. And so now we are forcing ourselves to be disruptive. So like now BuildStuff is doing an online event. That's disruptive in itself. Pine Tool is probably doing pretty fine now because everyone is doing online conferences and so on and so forth. So the thing is, like, when this kind of outside disruptive events happens, you need to either don't care, or you should monetize on it, or you should thrive on it, and take that window of opportunity and move forward and see how you can adapt to that. And I think work from home is kind of pretty clear what kind of features or what kind of applications you want to do to help your users by the end of the day, because that's what we are focusing on, right? Your users are going to have a better experience, and you as an app developer want to be more disruptive. And looking into, let's just take this quote: bring your tools to your team, save time, and avoid context switching. I mean, that's not Albert Einstein who said that, or any other smart person. It was actually just a copy and paste from Slack's webpage, specifically under integrations. And why I'm bringing that up is like looking at the work from home event that is happening right now. One industry that really are harnessing that, or like taking advantage of that without by accident almost, right, is the collaboration industry. Zoom, Teams, Slack, Asana, Trello, Jira, and so on and so forth. They're all like piggyback riding on this without actually changing anything. So the interesting thing then from my perspective is, how can you as an app developer be able to take a piece of that pie? Not competing with Slack, it's not about that, it's not competing with Teams, but how can you take a piece of that slice of that pie to be able to harness or to piggyback ride on this movement? Because work from home is not going to, even if everything's going to go back to within quotes normal, it's not going to go back to normal. I just read an article on LA Times. Everyone's going to continue to work from home. 60-70% of the big companies in the States is going to continue. People are going to continue to work from home. People already moved out from the big cities to the burbs, or like in the desert, because they want to and they can. So with that said, okay, so if we say bring blank to your users, saving them time and avoiding context switching, basically just copy and paste what Slack is saying. But you know how it is, like, the greatest artists, they steal. They don't, you don't create, you just steal. Anyways, so what is that blank to users? And within any app design or development, you're working with this. If you're in the design field at all, right, you have this this is like the normal, or this is a standard illustration for it. It's about removing friction, to increase motivation and remove friction, So something in between is, hindering me to do that, and usability is like one of those things. So if we want to talk about removing friction, what are we removing then? So we have the core is on the one side. What's the core? That's your core functionality. So if you're a CRM app developer, it's all those customer cards and whatnot. ERP, if you're a financial system, it's a payroll system, business intelligence, doesn't really matter. But your core functionality, who are you selling to and who you're competing to. So the friction we want to remove is between your core functionality and collaboration. That is the friction you want to remove. And by doing so, right, by removing the friction between because there is a lot of friction today, to be honest. Like if I see something in a dashboard, for example, in a BI tool, and I don't like it or I like it, and I want to talk to my team about it, I have to leave that context and move over to another context, Slack, Teams, or email, and have my conversation around it there. And then when I'm done, I'm switching back again. And we lost that context, we lost that connection, and we are creating friction. We're not removing friction. So the idea is to, like, if we can do that, if we can pull that together and remove that friction, so the core and collaboration is jiving really good together, then you will, absolutely increase retention, meaning that your users is going to spend way more time in your app because they don't have to switch around, they don't have to bounce around like a pinball, and also make it easier for them to actually talk to their peers. Again, this is not competing attention from Slack or Teams or anything else that still have its existence, right? But it's more like other conversations channels. But here in my payroll system, I want to be able to talk to my peers easily, contextually, and persistently. And with that said, you're going to see your churn reduce as well. Because since you're creating such a tight bond with your users, they're not going to leave your tool anytime soon, because they're spending so much time in your tool, and your tool is obviously, and your app is obviously better than your competitors, because you have this friction about team collaboration and communication removed. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look into industry and the big players, Salesforce, Zoom, Airtable, and Domo. Salesforce, CRM, Zoom, obviously we know video conferencing. Airtable is about numbers and sheets, and Domo is business intelligence. They're all doing it, done it for quite a while. And I can guarantee you that these guys are not guessing. They have the research in place, and they know what to put their money and how to make their product more disruptive and to be more competitive. So let's dive into some of these to just show you some examples. So Salesforce, for example, they have for ages actually had something in their tool called Chatter. Or back in the days, it literally looked like an IRC client, very simple, but it was embedded into Salesforce. And a lot of people who use Salesforce ended up using Chatter as the only communication tool within our company. So they basically expanded out from their Salesforce, which is really interesting. As you can see now, Chatter is more of a feed, like LinkedIn or Facebook feed, where you can post comments and like and whatnot. The other thing Salesforce is working really hard at right now is documents and file sharing, basically making their users independent or not like dependent at all of Office 365 or any other file tool for that matter. And they acquired a company a couple of years ago called Crip to enable them to do that. But as you can see here, this is a CRM tool. I'm on an account and I can create documents within that context. I'm not uploading a file from my computer and I'm downloading the file again and so on and so forth. It's all within here. And that's a major difference and a competitive advantage for Salesforce, and they're thriving on it, and they've been doing this for quite a while. The other player which I'm really impressed by is Domo. Domo's been around for a while within business intelligence, probably not so known for a lot of people, but Colorado company, super successful. Early on, they created in their dashboards, whatever data you're looking at in table format or dashboards or pie diagrams, that doesn't really matter. They added something they called the buzz within Domo. And buzz is literally a ripoff of Slack. The whole interface is exactly the same. You have channels, you have mentions, you have bots. It's just a pure ripoff of Slack. But the power is it's happening contextually. It's not a Slack replacement, and it's not competing with Slack, but it's definitely making their users within their app more productive, more collaborative, because you're talking about the context. And also to keep in mind when they have this conversation around a specific dashboard, right? If I revisit that dashboard like a couple of months later, they will still see what we talked about and like what conclusions we made and so on and so forth. And again, like, why are these guys doing this, right? Back to, they have deep pockets. You probably haven't. I don't have deep pockets. But if they are doing it as the big kahunas in the industry, we can, just make sure that we should be doing it as well. Literally just to piggyback right on the research they've been doing. And, say, thank you, we're going to do it, we're going to do better, and then we're going to beat you at your own game. And the main, I would say, metric for this, when it comes down to like why they're doing it, is the stickiness. I mean, by the end of the day, like that's one, the most important KPIs or, a metric for any app developers is how can I make sure that my user is spending as much time as possible in my app? The session time they're spending, this session or should be longer, and they should be able to do more in their app as well. So obviously it's all about stickiness to keep them within the app. And they are truly, removing that friction between the core and collaboration. And it happens to be so, like all these big players, and if you Google this and actually do some research and, and now when you have this knowledge, so to speak, right? If you actually look into this right now, you can see that each and every one has, identified that ingredient. And I promise you the key ingredient, right? And the ingredient being collaboration. So they have all identified collaboration to be the key ingredient for them to making sure that their core experience is better. So this is outside, again, their core, right? But for the almost the biggest thing they've been doing lately is adding this capability, all in the name of removing that friction. And what is collaboration? And collaboration, you're looking at those samples we just looked at, right? Is messaging, aka buzz in Domo, feeds, aka shatter in Salesforce, and also file sharing to be able to share files efficiently from within that app. Is like Salesforce is doing with Quip, even creating documents and sharing files and so on and so forth. I do also a huge believer in that you should make very good deep integrations to say Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, and so on and so forth, so I can collectively just pull everything together from those different sources within an app. So, and this, focusing on that key ingredient, collaboration in any shape or form. Like I urge you, as an app developer, and you guys are probably maybe in part of startups or whatnot, be agile, build fast, release often. So you can do simple stuff just to see if you get some appetite and some, bites from your user, and then and that's going to guide you where to go. But I definitely think in any capacity, you need to start prioritize this to be more competitive, because not only be more competitive, but your competitors are going to do this at some point or another. And this working from home, right, is really pushing this envelope a lot. So you need to, support users to be more productive in all scenarios, not just in a Slack channel or Teams or Zoom conferences. It's also very important to be able to deliver a productive experience for your users within your app as well. In-app messaging, in-app collaboration, in-app file sharing, and so on and so forth. So it's more important than ever, I think, to focusing on whatever roadmap you have, is to plunk in collaboration into that roadmap. And as I said, in any shape or form, be agile about it. Don't overdo it, overthink it. Try to get in there in some form and see what your users are thinking, so you can get some data points where you should dig down and do more work, so to speak. But it definitely needs to be there, and sometimes it needs to be maybe a parallel roadmap, because you have your core functionality and how you're creating your features for your core industry and your core users. That's fine, but this can also be a separate roadmap, to be honest. And by adding again the collaboration within your tool, you're going to be able to reduce that friction, as I talked about. And it's all about keeping your eyeballs within your app. There is no reason for you to give your eyeballs away to a third party when you can keep them within your app. There is no excuse for that by the end of the day. And again, it's not about creating something that will compete on this existing industry, aka Slack, Teams, and whatnot. It's more okay, how can I piggyback right on that industry in my little world by adding this capability. And that is my topic, and I hope I stay true to it as the key ingredients: retaining users with your app and reducing churn. And that little recipe would be a pinch of messaging, a dash of feeds, and a smidgen of file sharing, and voila, you have some collaboration within your app. So with that, I'm done with my presentation. If you guys have any questions or whatnot, you can ask me in the chat right now. Otherwise, I'm going to be in our virtual booth, Weavy, afterwards. So we can do one-on-ones. If you want to do that, you can come backstage, ask questions. I can show you some more samples, and so on and so forth. So thank you guys so much.